Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Voice of Islam Living History program. In today's program, we're going to look at migration and UK multiculturalism, personal reflections from a key guest of mine, Muhammad Ajeeb. Welcome, Muhammad Ajeeb.
Thank you very much, and Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Muhammad Ajeeb is a prominent citizen of a very important city in the north of England, Bradford. He was awarded the CBE in 2000 and he is well known for being the first Lord Mayor in the UK, appointed in 1985. These are some wonderful achievements, Muhammad Ajeeb. In today's program, I want to look at really the linkage to migration, how Britain has been enriched by diverse communities from across the world. But I want to go back really to the linkage with the British Empire. And just really to put things in perspective, just share with listeners the impact of the British Empire. Because in the mid-18th century, and at least until 1956, many parts of the world were under the British Empire, probably the most dominant empire in modern history. And during this time, lots of people from different backgrounds came under its influence. And finally, due to that influence, they came over to the UK. So before I deal with when you came over, just take me through a little bit of your early childhood. You were born in Kashmir, I gather. Is that right?
I was indeed, yeah.
Whereabouts?
It's a small village near Dadial, which used to be and still is quite, a small town, yeah.
Which was, you might not want to give your age away, but when were you actually born? Just want to get a rough idea in relation to partition and some of the major developments. Which year were you born?
I remember partition. I was born in 1938, and I was about 9 when the partition took place of the subcontinent. I do remember some of the events, yeah.
Obviously, this was quite a traumatic development for those living in the subcontinent, and British historians would say also for what they had to go through as well. What were your memories and reflections during that period when 47, 48, when Pakistan and India got their independence?
Yeah. I think I can remember some of the villages where Hindus were living, which were not far from our village. There used to be a lot of talk about that, the Hindus will be driven away from that area back into India. Some of the houses, I remember, they were, put on fire. And they fled, first of all, from small villages into Dadial, which was a town, Tahsil. And from there, probably then some of them were killed and some of them made it for India. I was not old enough to understand everything. But I think one of the very sad memories I still have is that there were some soldiers of the Maharaja's army who were stationed in that sort of area, because we are living just at the border of now Pakistan, in those days India and the state of Kashmir, right, and near river Jhelum. And I was small, but I think some of the other boys who were older than me, they told me that some event was going to take place in regards to the fate of these soldiers. And when we went there, I was at very tender age, and I did witness the killings of these soldiers. They were brought into the river bank, and later on, some of the elders told us that they were promised that they will be sent to Pakistan, where they will become, the prisoners of war or something. But instead, they were slain, and that memory still very strongly sticks to my mind. I can't forget it.
The big names in history around that time, obviously Muhammad Ali Jinnah, lovingly called Qaid-e-Azam, Gandhiji, Nehru, Lord Mountbatten. These were big figures making history or developing things as they were going. At what age did you become conscious of any of these names, or what was happening around you? Did to make sense of what was going on?
I could not probably understand the significance of their role in the division of the subcontinent. But obviously, Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah's name was a household name even in those days. Everyone knew who was Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Nehru. And then obviously all these stories were told by elders and some of the people who could read the newspapers. They used to sit together, that was the village culture and life. And they used to we used to sit at the back on the floor. And they used to discuss amongst themselves, and they used to say, well, so many people have been killed here and there, so many Muslims, so many thousands of Muslims have been killed in Jammu and in Amritsar. We didn't know, where these places were, but I still remember the names. So, yes, I mean, most people, even in the village, they knew, and through them, obviously, we knew these names. But, I mean, as I said, we could not at that time comprehend the significance of their role in representing the two, major political party, Muslim Leagues and the Congress. So when we grew up then, I remember when I was in 5th and 6th form, Jamaat, then I think that we were told the history, we were taught the history of the partition, that why it took place and what were the reasons and so on and so forth. But then we learned that it's not only that in that small village where I was born, I could see these killings, but millions of people actually lost their lives as a result of this partition.
After partition, obviously, both Pakistan and India faced major challenges, and Kashmir in particular, because it became a divided state as well. So what made you think about leaving Kashmir for Britain? What was the trigger?
Well, obviously, trigger was the economic. After completing my matriculation level of education in the Dayal, there were no jobs available there. So I had my uncle who was living at that time in Karachi. He was working for the construction industry there, because Karachi was, after the establishment of Pakistan, it was the main center for the refugees coming from India. So there were a lot of sort of new developments in terms of housing taking place. So he was there. So my father said, why don't you go to your uncle? And I said, well, as you wish. I mean, in those days, obviously, the parents' desires were highly respected and fulfilled. So I embarked upon a long journey, which is 1,000 miles from my village to Karachi, with one of the friends of my father, who was a rickshaw driver in Karachi. And my father said he will look after you and he will take you safely to your uncle. So I left my village, I still remember. I did not like to leave it because obviously I was born there. I didn't know anything about Karachi, never mind about Karachi. I even did not go to Jhelum or Gujranwala, which were nearest cities. So I remember when father came right up to Mirpur with me, and we caught a bus to Jhelum, and we were both full of tears and crying, very emotional about the whole thing, because at that very, I was only 15 and a half. So I came to Karachi, and I lived there for 4.5 years, 5 years, nearly 4.5 years, yeah. I worked as a laborer, earning only about 1 rupees 8 annas. It was very difficult for me to go through that kind of experience because I never had done any work being a child. And then I joined part-time education, one of the colleges there. And during the day I used to work, and evening I used to go to college. And then gradually when I saved some money, then after 2 years, I was able to go full education, full-time education. So after 4 years, I was able to do a degree, Bachelor of Arts, from Karachi. And then after doing that, I think I worked for the Karachi in those days, the Customs House.
So how old were you at this stage?
At that time, I was about 19.
19 or so, okay.
So I worked there for 6 months before I came to England.
So again, what was the trigger though to why not somewhere else or why England?
I think that there was another, another young man from Mirpur who was also working for the customs department. And in those days, 99% of the people working in the civil service were mainly the newcomers to Karachi, what still they call themselves refugees. They were more educated than the indigenous Karachi people. And there were few Punjabis. I know there were 2 or 3, one top officer, chief accounts officer, he was from Sialkot. But this friend of mine, he was there, and his elder brother, who had emigrated to UK in 1952, his brother here in Nottingham sent him the letter saying that you can come here, and I know that you'll get not better job in the sense that job will be as a manual labor, but you'll get some more money. So he came, and because we were very close friends, then after about 6 months, he wrote a letter to me and he said, come to England, and there are more opportunities, and there's a little bit more money, because we used to get hardly about 160 rupees per month as a salary, being a junior clerk. And he said, you can come here. So I just got the passport. In those days, there were no need for visas. And I went home and asked my father if I could have some money for the air passage. He said, I haven't got any money. Hardly the savings he had was about 400 rupees. Then I borrowed some of the money from my uncles and other people. And that's how I managed to buy a ticket. And I remember that I came to England on a very cold day, very foggy day, on 24th of November, 1957.
Did you have any apprehensions, though? Or did you have any fears, or what sort of society you were going into? Because clearly you were leaving your own culture, your own, comfort zone.
We had, amongst us in the customs department, I think the chief officer, who was called collector of customs, he was an ex-civil servant from England who remained in Pakistan, still holding that position. And there were, in those days in Karachi, because Karachi was then capital of Pakistan, so there were some English and American people. We could see them because I could speak the language, not so fluently as I'm able to speak now. But no, I think I didn't have any particular fear. I think that I had a very burning ambition to come and see what kind of life is here. My perceptions were entirely, when I came here, I found them to the contrary of what I had believed about the life here in Britain. I mean, we thought, because we could see English white people in Karachi who were in holding positions of authority, and they were well dressed. And in some of the magazines which we read about the life here in England, they projected, that everyone is probably rich.
So you had high expectations
exactly,
and
very high expectations.
money grew on trees and
well, not that, but we expected that. Yes, it's a more sort of developed, civilized society, and everything's different here. But somehow I was quite an adventurist from a very childhood. I wanted to come out and from.
So which year did you leave to come to the UK?
I arrived here on 23rd of November 1957.
Oh, so you were one of the very early people,
Early birds.
because Bangla Dam in Amirpur got built later on, and the
65.
big influence came much later on with the people. So you landed at Heathrow, I assume?
I landed at Heathrow Airport, and I still remember vividly. I'll tell you about my very unique experience as far as the cultural differences are concerned in those days. There was coach from Heathrow which was supposed to bring us to Victoria, what do you call it, the traveling center. And I got on the coach. I remember buying the ticket, and then the coach was full. So there was only one seat vacant, but on that seat there was a young girl sitting, right? And I was very, very hesitant to sit next to her on the same seat, because in Karachi there was total segregation. The female used to sit the front of the bus. Then there was some kind of curtains, and then, men at the back. And I remember the conductor, he said, sit down, there's a seat vacant there. So I said, how can I sit? Then he actually, third time he came and he pushed me, and he said, there is this vacant seat, can't you understand English? Sit there. And believe you me, when I sat on that seat, I was so careful. I was so careful that my body doesn't touch her body. Yes. You see what I mean? So I was just, sitting, very uncomfortable. So that journey of probably it was about an hour from Heathrow to Victoria Terminal. So when I came there, I said, thank God.
Fascinating, isn't it? Because now people wouldn't think twice, but because of the cultural upbringing,
in those days.
Absolutely, it's quite a show. So, which was the first city then you went to?
I came because my friend was already in Nottingham, who had invited me to come to him. So I caught a train from St. Pancras to Nottingham. But then I had another experience which has been publicized very widely here in Britain and elsewhere when I became the Lord Mayor. Because I remember in '85 when I became Lord Mayor, then there were a lot of people from press and the media. And in particular, there was a journalist from the Daily Mail in those days, an elderly, quite an experienced journalist. And he was interviewing me. He said, what I see your track record, that you have always talked about discrimination, racism, and all these kind of things. Are you suggesting that you have never met any kind white person in your life? I said, I've never said that I haven't. I have met the first day of my arrival in Britain. So he was so excited. He said, tell me about it. So I said that when I first arrived at St. Pancras Station, it was extremely cold day, foggy day. I simply thought, where the hell I've come to? The buildings were dark and everything, because I came from a country with this natural light and colorful buildings, and even mode of dress is very colorful. But here it was some kind of, very conformity in every respect. And I was so cold, I had just one thin suit on myself. There was an overcoat or anything. I remember putting into the vending machine about shelling a few pence. I can't remember. I got a cup of chocolate. And then the announcement was made that, no, your train will be on that platform. You go there. We went there. I put my small suitcase above the seat. I sat there. But in those days, I mean, those trains were extremely cold. And I was shivering, virtually shivering, because, you know. And suddenly another, I said, gentleman with his hat, very nice suit on, he came. And he sat next to me. And he said, are you new to this country? I said, yes, sir. He said, you seem to be very cold. I said, yes, I am. Although I have had a cup of chocolate, it doesn't make any difference because of my clothing. He went out. First of all, he bought a cup of coffee for me. Then he came and he said, when the train starts running, then there'll be some form of heating. But while it's stationary, we can't do anything about it. So he opened his own briefcase, which was quite large in size, and he had a traveling blanket with him. So he put around me and he said, you know, particularly your legs, and yeah, you put around it. And he said, you should be okay. So when the train starts running, then the heat began to operate. And then after about an hour, I felt, you know, that I'm comfortable. So when we reached Nottingham, I said he came out of the station to the platform, in outside platform, and he asked the taxi driver that this young man wants to go to so-and-so place, so we leave him there. And he also offered me a job. He said, I live in Derby, I've got a farm, and if you can't get a job here in Nottingham, then you come to so-and-so place. And I said, yes, sir, thank you very much. I said, he was the kindest person I met on the first day of my arrival in Britain.
I think that's a lovely story, to be honest. And I know you've been involved in race relations and fighting inequalities all your life, but, you know, that's the beauty of what you're able to say and share with people. So tell me, when you got to Nottingham, what were your sort of early impressions then of work and the society you were in, and some of the early challenges before you got deeply into politics?
I didn't like it. I regret it. I virtually cried on my bed, you know, the second night. I said, where the hell I've come to? I was working in the office, you know, at least working in the customs departments, a lot of respect. You had the people, you know, bringing files on to you and all these kind of things. And if you want a cup of tea, you could only say, well, bring a cup of tea from the canteen. Everything was there. But here, I could see the life is entirely different to my expectations. They were all single people. This large house, 4-bedroom house, there were 2 rooms downstairs. Altogether, there were 27 people living in that house. 2 of us, my friend and myself, in one bed. There used to be about 2-3 beds in one room. We used to make our own tea, cook our own meals. And then on top of that, there was nothing which we could enjoy eating. No halal food, no halal meat. So I lived, I think, for about 2 years just on eating eggs, beans, peas, cauliflower, and potatoes. So, you know, as I said, that then I didn't like the landscape and because it was winter, everything was dry. Everywhere you go, you see only fog and some snow. And this kind of climate I was not used to. No, I didn't like it.
I mean, the other thing in those days, of course, in the 50s and 60s, it was all coal fire in England. And a lot of the buildings would have been, and you had come from Kashmir and even Pakistan, but, a virtual paradise, so green, so fresh,
Exactly.
and to a totally different
The
climate.
first thing you need to do was to lit the coal fire in the morning. All your hands were blackened.
Did it make you think that, gosh, this great big empire and we had heard so much about it and why is it so different? Did it make you think?
Yes, I think I could see also their infrastructure was better than us. I mean, at least there were other facilities which I think that we didn't have in those days in any of the developing countries. The gas available, abundance of electric, and all these kind of roads conditions were not bad compared with the Pakistan's what existed, the road conditions. Those, I could see a lot of progress here, but no, I think that what I expected was contrary to my expectations and hopes.
I think this is probably a good place to have a break, and after the break, we're going to carry on with your fascinating insights and story. So welcome back to the second part of this program. I have my guest Mohammed Ajeeb, a prominent figure in the UK, and we were talking about your reflections on UK and its development in relation to migration and UK multiculturalism, and your experiences of early arrival into the UK. So you came into Nottingham.
Yeah.
So you had your initial difficulties. So how did you start settling into life?
After about 3 weeks, I was able to secure a job as a manual worker. It was in the soap manufacturing factory. And then I moved on from there to British Rails, from British Rail to another small factory. From there, then I moved on to buses as a conductor. Then I became a driver. In 1968, I was able to get a job as a white-collar worker, and that was in the field of community relations councils.
Oh, that was a very interesting period, wasn't it? Because in 1968, Enoch Powell made that infamous speech of Rivers of Blood, where he questioned the level of immigration into the UK and the dangers that would have, and escalation into racial tensions. And as I recall, the opposition leader at that time was Edward Heath, who fired him after that speech. And Powell never really made any prominent position, but it had a big impact on UK race relations, and you were clearly deeply involved with the...
I remembered very well his speech. I think it was made in Birmingham to the Conservative Associations on 20th April 1968, where he described the immigrants as Negroes and Sikhs in those days, because he was from Wolverhampton, and these were the two immigrant communities who were predominantly at that time of the history living in Wolverhampton. He made a very long speech, but there was also obviously reference to the Rivers of Blood, and he quoted the Roman era of history, and he said that that river, where he said the river Tiber will be foaming with blood, and so on and so forth. That statement actually raised really a big controversy all over the country. And a lot of us, obviously, particularly the immigrant communities, we were against that kind of racist speech. Then after that, I remember that his position somehow became a little bit less influential within the Conservative Party. And then the party decided to have the first Race Relation Act, which was put before the Parliament in 1968 and which was passed, probably to his disappointment. And that act, Parliamentary Act, it was the first time that Britain recognized that there was a problem as far as the discrimination against minority communities or immigrants in those days were concerned. And they made unlawful as far as the provision of services and the provision of employment was concerned. These were the two major areas which were covered by that legislation.
Did you feel yourself at a personal level, though, that there was considerable level of certainly misunderstanding, if not outright prejudice? Did you actually feel that against Asians or ethnic minority communities?
In those days, there was outright, not only prejudice, I think that there was overt remarks from time to time made by some of the white citizens against the black and the Asian and the other new arrival people who arrived here in this country from Commonwealth countries. I remember the days, early days, when before the legislation there used to be some adverts displayed at some of the shops' windows, which clearly and openly said that rooms to let, but no blacks and no Irish and no dogs. I think that I did face discrimination in many because obviously I could understand the language, I could understand the body language of some of the people, I could understand the remarks in the slang language which they were making against us, very derogatory, insulting remarks. But most of our people, particularly the Asians, because of the language difficulties, they couldn't understand. So they used to just say yes sir and laugh at them. Yes, I'll do this and that. In one of the instances, I know when I was working in that soap factory, one of the foremen, I was cleaning a machine, and he said, "Hey, you, come on." I ignored him. And second time, third time, he came to me and he said, "I'm asking you to come." I said, "The way you asked me is not civilized. I'm not your dog. I'm a human being." So he sacked me instantaneously. I said, okay. So there were. Otherwise, it's obvious, or it was obvious in those days, that the government would not pass a legislation in the parliament against discrimination, although there was some conservative parliamentarians in those who opposed it, including Iqbal. But the government, I think it was Heath who was in power. No, there was. I remember. There is a lot of documentary evidence. Many books were written. There were many programs on TV. They were presented. And obviously, there were many papers were written on this issue.
I think, I came in 1967, because you'd probably spent good 10 years there, but as a child, 9 years or so, I was quite shocked at the overt racism. So often we would be called oi pakis, me and my brother, when we used to go into town, we couldn't speak much English. And it was dreadful, really. Like you, I probably cried my eyes out every night thinking, what am I doing here?
It was quite
and I
prevalent.
think must have hurt a lot of other people as well who tried to make this a new home, and yet they were dealt with in that way. But you were probably more informed and educated than many of the others of that time. Were you able to counteract it more?
Yes, very much so. I was quite involved in the trade union movement. I was a very active member of the Transport and General Workers Union. I became highly involved in anti-racist campaigns, and then wherever we saw that immigrants were being discriminated, and I think in those days we used to go even to London to demonstrate against some of these forms of discrimination and so on and so forth. So I was not only interested, but I was very active in this area of anti-racist campaigns.
I mean, it's tragic in many ways because a lot of these people, their fathers, older brothers, others gave so much time and effort and lives as well in the Second World War in defense of the British Empire and working. So, to be treated in that way, a lot of people must have felt quite dejected.
No, because, I mean, let's be honest. Britain, as you said, I think the opening remarks, was the largest empire on this Earth planet, going back to the early 18th century, right up to the early 20th century. And the kind of attitudes which developed here as sort of nation belonging to, the very great imperialist power, there was this sort of complex of superiority from which the most British people suffered. As a result, we, being their subjects, we were suffering from inferiority complex. And although they needed us immediately after the war because the British economy was shattered, destroyed, and so on and so forth, they wanted to rebuild their economy. We came here to work, but the working conditions were intolerable, long hours, less wage, and so all these kind of things. And some of us who were very active, we were fighting for equality, for social justice. We said, if these workers are doing the same job as a white worker, then they should be paid equal wage. In those days, it wasn't. I mean, there was a lot of, struggle some of the people made there to fight against some of the inequalities.
I mean, it was a fascinating phase of development for this country, wasn't there? Because on the one hand, there were some caring people who would politically fight and work for trying to remove discrimination. On the other hand, there were the media moguls and the media. I mean, for example, I used to watch Tarzan, and you can imagine the impact that had on you negatively in terms of subjugation and then obviously the empire looking out shooting down savages everywhere they went. And so as a young kid you tended to get quite influenced, but you were in a better position.
But I'm not suggesting that every white person I found was racist. No, it's not that. I think our fight was against those who believed in racial inequality, who believe in the concept of superiority and all these kind of things. But there were some very good people who helped us a lot, who were fighting with us, the black people and the Asians and other minorities, for social justice. And they're still fighting.
And that's probably why we are where we are with, I think, Britain overall, as a country to live in, isn't it?
Yeah.
But tell me, you said you went on some marches and the 70s was striking for Tariq Ali.
Yeah.
I mean, he was such a prominent figure. Just tell me your reflections on the impact people like him had on a changing society in Britain.
Well, in a way, in those days, because I was young, and I think some of us regarded him as our hero, as a leader.
For listeners who may be too young to remember, Tariq Ali was the Oxford University educated student leader.
Very articulate, very revolutionary, and still is very revolutionary. A very radical young man in those days. Even he used to lead a demonstration against the Vietnam War in those days.
Peter Hain, and there were such close...
Peter Hain changed a lot when he became part of the establishment. But Tariq Ali...
But they were in the younger days, they were together, They were,
Peter Hain was basically because he did witness the excesses against the black South African apartheid and so on and so forth. So he was influenced by that kind of the injustice. So when he came here, he was very active in these kind of campaigns. But then changed. But Tariq Ali, I think credit must go to him that he still remains a good socialist, a very radical, revolutionary, still young man, I think.
I mean, in relation to race relations, just to share a fact with you, some of the research put it that in 1945, just after the war, the number of non-white people were in their low thousands. But by the 1970s, they numbered approximately 1.4 million. A third of these were born in the United Kingdom, children who were born here. So clearly, the numbers were increasing rapidly. And on the one hand, you had these tensions building up. On the other hand, you had people trying to have, like the Race Relations Act, etc., where you were involved in. So how big a challenge did you feel it was to create a more equal society at that stage? Were you optimistic?
I think there was a big challenge. By nature, I'm an optimistic person. But I knew that it is going to be a perpetual struggle, actually, to achieve some form of equality as far as the racial justice is concerned. So obviously, we were engaged in that kind of struggle, some of us, very actively. No, I never thought that we are not going gradually to achieve some kind of successes, even though they may be minimal, but with the passage of time, I think because Britain obviously is a reformist society, it's not a revolutionary society, so we had to accept that kind of position of society in which I think we were part of that struggle.
How did you see the influx of the East African nations? Because obviously a lot of the early migration was from Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, people coming from remote villages that we talked about. But suddenly you had a big number with Idi Amin's expulsion from Uganda, and you must have lived through that and seen the challenge.
Yes, I remember very well, because in 1969-70 I was working in Nottingham as a housing officer for the Nottingham Community Relations Council. I had to deal with some of the homeless families coming from East Africa, particularly from Uganda after the expulsion by General Amin. But they were different to the ordinary Asians who came from the rural areas of India and Pakistan, because they had lived in Africa for generations. Some of them were born there, educated there, and because they were first were the white and they held second position in those countries. Most of them were business people and so on and so forth. When they came here, there was some little noises made by anti-immigration lobby, but on the whole, I think the people thought that they were very successful there, business people, and they should be successful here. They were welcomed, and I think that they were offered all forms of assistance and help in order to make their resettlement in Britain as easier process. So, no, from the very beginning of their advent to Britain, I think they were regarded as being an asset, and they were accepted by and large.
So in the mid-70s then, you'd have spent quite a bit of time up here, but there were also major developments taking place in your original home in Pakistan, Kashmir. Did you ever feel like saying, well, maybe I should go back? Or a lot of people thought that they may go back, but they never did. What were your thoughts?
No, I used to visit Pakistan after 2-3 years in those days. And I remember going back in 1972 when we lost half of Pakistan.
That was the war.
Exactly, between Pakistan and India. And the Bangladesh was established in 1972, I think. And there was a People's Party government. Bhutto was in power. Because I was interested in politics, I used to go there and talk to my friends about the home politics back in Pakistan. There was some changes. Obviously, Bhutto was, he gave tremendous awareness to the ordinary folk. and the poor people, and so on and so forth. But I could see that people somehow were full of over expectations and aspirations and hopes. I knew that they were unrealistic. I thought they won't be achieved, and there could be some problems. Then what happened? And we know after that, dictator Zia then seized the opportunity when there was some unrest in the country, and he grabbed the power. And after that, then we know what happened.
No, and we're going to come to that. In fact, if you look at the end of the 70s and start of the 80s, there was some, major changes going on in the world and also in the United Kingdom as well. Mrs. Thatcher came into power, obviously, in 1979 here, and there was a massive change in the manufacturing base and in the industrial heartlands of the north of England, and a shift in the economy towards a service economy and banking, etc. And then globally, you had, I don't know which one happened first, you had the Afghanistan, Russian invasion, and then you had the Iran-Iraq war. So how did you feel with your Muslim heritage and your British sort of involvement with race relations and society up here?
First of all, can I say, I remember very well. I came to Nottingham in 1972, 73, I think. Mm-hmm. I was hunted for a job. Mm-hmm. The shelter, which was the national campaign for the homeless, mm-hmm. They had initiated a project here in Bradford to improve race relations through housing. So I came here to work. Then I think after about 2 years, in 1976, I was elected as the chairman of the then Community Relations Council Bradford, the position I held for about 7-8 years, and then made this organization very high profile. But during that period, Bradford suffered rapidly from the loss of...
You were still down in Nottingham?
No, I was here.
Oh, okay.
From this loss of woolen textile industry, a large number of people became without jobs. Unemployment became the big issue. The government obviously then changed in late 70s.
Yeah, 79 I think was when the Tories came.
And then the Tories came to power. But the 79 up till about 84, 85, that was a very volatile historically period globally. I think many important events happened. Russian Soviet Union, those days, invasion of Afghanistan, 1979. Khomeini was taken back from Paris to Tehran, and Shah was toppled, his government. This sort of what they called a revolution, Iran.
Because in many ways, these three issues are related even to this day now, with what's going on in Iran, with what's happening in Afghanistan, with what's happening to British society and Muslims. So that's why it's an interesting phase.
Historically, it's very significant, that period. Yeah. And because what we are facing now, all these big challenges of extremism and terrorism, I mean, the
roots are...
the genesis of all these ills and evils actually is the Afghani situation. So, yes, I do remember. And obviously, General Zia, he was stooge of the United States and the West. He accepted their offer to...
And in fact, the British also were very strongly supportive of his involvement in the Soviet Union as well. So from our point of view as British citizens...
The world was still going through this Cold War.
Yes, us and them. Yes.
Between the Soviet Union and the Western powers. So all the Western powers, including some of the Muslim countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia and others who were under the influence of the America and the Western powers, they all got together to rid of Russians from Afghanistan. And I think the strategy they devised them together in a united sort of form was that let us train some of the volunteers from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Sudan, and Pakistan, and trained them as mujahideen. And they deliberately gave them the title of mujahideen to fight against what they called in those days the evil forces of communism.
If you remember, Hollywood lent a great hand, didn't they? They made them so romantic. And
Pakistan, under Zia, they were given some financial assistance, and the CIA came there, and they opened some training camps and so on and so forth. So, yes, after a few years, they were able to defeat the Soviet Union with the arms of America and with the will and the religious zeal of some of these people, mujahideens, who were from Afghanistan and other Muslim countries, but predominantly from Pakistan. And but then what happened after that? In Pakistan, since then, we haven't seen peace. We haven't seen that kind of unity which Pakistan wanted to develop as a nation state. And this extremism, religious extremism and terrorism, I mean, these two things have become unmanageable problems for Pakistan.
Well, I know you have quite strong socialist ideals and very open principles for justice
as well. Not only that, but it is for all over the world. These spillovers we can feel, in America, in Britain, and although obviously then I'll later on probably when you discuss
we're going to pick on that. I mean, this period is fascinating to me because it's the first time in 1979 that I went back to Pakistan, Kashmir, from my childhood arrival here. And one of my uncles was quite a senior colonel in the army, quite a senior figure, well before, General Musharraf and his team probably were going through. And I remember how passionate he was about fighting the Soviets and defending the Muslim brothers and everything. And as a young person growing up in a very open society, I said, Uncle, you might be backing the wrong horse here with all these mujahideen and all your fairy ideas, but, Allah only knows. Well, I think we should
this war was promoted, a war between the people who had faith and those who were faithless. In other words, I think the CIA tried to train these people by infusing in them some kind of sort of a propaganda spirit that you're fighting against godless people.
I think we should take a break here, and I think we'll catch up in the second part of this program. But it's been a fascinating discussion, Mohammed Ajeeb. Thank you.
Thank you very much.